Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to extend my sincere condolences to the families that were affected by the flooding a couple of days ago. So it really saddens my heart. Well, I'm very happy to have you here. I'm excited to have Jason Marczak and José Juan Ruiz. They have had different research papers about Latin America and the Caribbean. So we are in a pivotal moment. Our region is bursting with potential along investments, along climate change, energy transition, and also on the social agenda and the social progress. So today, we will talk about all these issues and all these topics, which are really interesting, and we just heard about the right strategy for Latin America. So over the past year, José Juan has the document on why does Latin America matter, and also Jason has been researching and publishing some papers about the US strategy with Latin America. So I will start by asking you, Jason, what are the main insights from the paper, and what will you, can you share with us today?
Well, thank you so much, Marisela. Great to be here with you and José Juan, another panel together, fantastic. And thanks to Santander as well for, I think this is the first time that there's a Latin America panel as part of this conference. That's absolutely fantastic. And I join Marisela and all the other speakers in giving my condolences to the families in Spain that have suffered from the flooding. In my country, in the United States, we just saw that recently as well. And the Carolinas after the last hurricane, and we see that we're not immune to the effects of climate change writ large. A U.S. strategy with Latin America and the Caribbean is absolutely essential. I'm going to ask you, how many times has President Biden traveled to Latin America? Or who's traveled to Latin America more, President Biden or did President Trump travel to Latin America more during their terms? Mm-hmm. Who traveled more, President Biden or President Trump? It's a trick question. They each have only made one trip. President Biden traveled once to Latin America in 2023 for the North American Leaders Summit, and President Trump traveled once to Latin America, to Argentina for the G20 summit back in 2018. So one trip for each president. Now, of course, if I ask that question in a few weeks, the answer will be different because President Biden is traveling to Brazil for the G20 and to Peru for the APEC next month. But as of right now, it's one for each president. And yeah, President Xi has traveled twice since 2018. He was in President Trump at the G20, and he was also in Brazil for the BRICS summit in 2019. Now, I posit that U.S. ability for power projection globally is partly based on the fact that we live in a relatively safe and secure neighborhood. We are blessed as the United States in living in being a country in the Americas, right? A region that has so much potential, a region that has 20% of the world's oil reserves, 25% of global strategic metals, more than 30% of primary forest across the world. And this is a region that, as we wrote in our report, working with the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Subcommittee for the Western Hemisphere, that we have to also recognize the risks and our episodic engagement with the hemisphere. And that's what the U.S. has. We have episodic engagement with the hemisphere. That's partly illustrated by Marisela by that comment in the beginning about the number of trips. And so what we sought out to do is to put out a 5-year strategy. And why 5 years? Well, because 4 years is a presidential term, and what we've started to see now is this incredible oscillation, right? This pendulum swift shifting in U.S. politics as we see around the world between different administrations. And so the importance of a 5-year term, and also the importance of working with Congress, because members of Congress, House members, senators, stay for much longer than those in the White House. And we defined it based on a couple guiding principles. One is that we need to prioritize cooperation. And actually, as we were putting this together, I consulted with all of our US ambassadors currently serving in the region, or chiefs of mission. We don't have ambassadors in every country. That's a different question. But also with Latin American ambassadors serving in Washington, went to New York and consulted with folks in Wall Street and others. And we put together a group, half Latin American, half US, to look at what should be a strategy, because our other challenge is it can't just be a strategy just from Washington. It has to be a strategy informed by the opinion leaders, political leaders, business leaders across the region. And one thing I heard loud and clear is we need to prioritize cooperation, and that we need a different toolbox, right? Some of the tools that are most effective in the U.S. toolbox are those tools that prioritize how to work sanctions and other tools that, rather than focusing on cooperation, focus on how to assure that U.S. priorities are moved forward in a way that seeks to use kind of the full thrust of the United States. But also we need to focus on nimbleness and pragmatism, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but it's clear that the wheel needs to be greased to more effectively collaborate. And also we need to recognize, and this is what we do at the Atlantic Council, we need to recognize the importance of Latin America and the Caribbean in a broader global context. I know that Santander recognizes that as well. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here and saying this in Spain. And there's a couple different elements of that, Marisela. Economy, investment and commerce, energy security, migration, security, democracy, institutions, and governance. These all need to be part of a broader strategy with the region. And I'll end by saying that when I look at, and Jim Messina will talk more about the US election, but I'll also say that whether President Trump or Vice President Harris win, US key priorities in the region will largely be somewhat similar at a 10,000-foot level, right? The priorities of focusing on migration, the priority of focusing on security, and the priority of focusing on how to assert greater U.S. influence at a time of greater Chinese investment, trade, and other cooperation with the hemisphere.
Okay, no, great insights. José Juan, why does Latin America matter?
Thank you, Marisela, and I also join the condolences for the recent events in Spain, the dolor. Let me just begin by telling why we produce the report that Marisela and Jason has been mentioning, why matters Latin America. We were thinking how to make a different approach to Latin America, and for nearly 4 months, we were asking CEOs, Europarliamentary people from the Commission, from the think tanks, from the universities, from the companies in Europe, what they think about Latin America. And to put things in a very brief sentence, they told us Latin America is a political disaster, Latin America is an economic disaster, United States and Europe are fed up with Latin America, and now China is the hegemon. And those of you, like Spanish people who invested in Latin America in the last 25 years, have destroyed value for the shareholders. We put together these very, very rough statements, and we decide, okay, now we are going to put the numbers and to see what happened when these ideas, these bias, are faced to the numbers that validate or refute this story. This is the first time that in the Real Instituto Elcano we have been beginning to use the sentence that today is our motto: datos matan relatos. Data kills narratives. Because when you go through these 4 statements, you discover that they are not based on analysis, on really research or data. Latin America is not a political disaster. If Latin America is a political disaster, all other countries around the world are political disasters, because we have not been behaving in a quite different way that United States or European countries has been behaving in the last 40 years or 30 years. Let me pinpoint one very big difference of Latin America in terms of politics with the other emerging countries. Latin America is the only continent in which, as a continent, are trying to take off and become developed countries following a democratic system. 90% of the countries in Latin America have democratic system. 85% of the population in Latin America are living on democratic system. You have in Latin America 2, 3, 4 generations of people who have been living with the democratic system. Of course, with weakness, with problems, with trade-offs, but Latin America is the only continent in which democracy is the base upon you are building your convivence and your social life. And this is extremely important. This makes Latin America very different from the others. Let me go to the second statement. It's an economic disaster. Well, it's quite interesting. If you go and see what is the main change in Latin America, and we have seen this morning some comments on this direction, it's very clear to identify. Latin America was, from the 70s to the beginning of 21st century, it was the source of something like one every 4 crises that the world suffer. That is to say, Latin America generates global crises that went from Latin America to the global economy. What has been the responsibility of Latin America in the last 20 years in this transmission of global crisis? Latin America has just produced one crisis. This is important, not just because the source of crisis has changed, but because Latin American policymakers have learned how to manage the economy and how to remain and being macroeconomic, very orthodox. And this is a key point because this has made Latin America to converge to those countries that you can bet that are going to manage crisis in a predictable way. And this is extremely important. What has been the problem? Growth has not been there. But Latin America still has a GDP per capita that is above GDP per capita in other emerging countries. And no, there is no such a large number of countries which has been able to close the gap of GDP with United States. Let me go to the third point. The hegemony of China in Latin America as an economic force. Jason was making a very interesting point. Biden and Trump has not traveled very often to Latin America. You can say something similar in Europe. And Xi Jinping has been there many times. And you read a lot about China involved in Latin America. But if you go take a plane and go to Mexico, it would be completely crazy that you think that China is hegemonic in Mexico. It's not the case. And if you go and take a flight to Brazil or to Argentina or to Santiago de Chile, you will see Europeans, you will see Americans, you will not see Chinese being the dominant and the shaping the economy. I think this is extremely important, and it's inferred from the fact that it's true. Latin America, China, it's one of the most important buyers of commodity export of Latin America. But it's also the same in Africa. It's also the same of all the producers of commodities. The problem of Latin America is that it needs to diversify its export base, but it's not that China is the hegemon there. Just a number to have an idea of what I am talking with numbers. Data kills narratives. Datos matan relatos. 1.5% of the total stock of foreign direct investment in Latin America is made by Chinese foreign direct investment in the region. 0.5, and it's compared at 7% when you are talking of Africa, or maybe of 3.5% when you are talking the ex-USSR republics in Europe. Don't get fooled by the narratives. It's not true. China is strategically taking place in Latin America, but is not the hegemon. The hegemon still is the United States, and I think that for the good reason, and Europe has there a very important role to play. And let's go to the final point, that those that trust in Latin America lose money, destroy value for the shareholders. Well, Spain has investment abroad that now are on the tune of $600 billion. And we have something like $300 billion, slightly less, invested in Latin America. What has been the result of this investment? Okay, even taking into account the cost of capital and the volatility of the economies, what Spain has been able to derive from this foreign direct investment abroad has been a creation of value for their shareholder of $100 billion. And this $100 billion is made by something like $35 billion of shareholder value created in Latin America with an investment that is 200 and something like $75 billion with investment in the developed countries. Of course, you have had problems. You have had losers. Venezuela, Argentina has been having a direct impact, negative impact on value, on shareholder value. But on the whole, Latin America has created value for the Spanish shareholders. Let me put together all these comments and make an advice to you, investors, people who are interested in the continent. If you are going to invest in Latin America, make your homework. Look for data. Look for people who make independent research, because otherwise you will miss a very good opportunities to invest and to have profits in the region. Don't trust on the media. Don't trust on the bias. Latin America has a bad reputation, but when you put numbers to the opportunities, most of the time, what you are going to see is a very good place to invest there.
Thank you, José Juan. I was worried when he started with the hypothesis, disaster. So thank you for finishing up on a good note, on a positive note. It's very important also what you were mentioning, Jason, that Latin America needs to be in the global conversation, the global context. So we were talking about climate change in the different panels. So we in this room and online are one of the first generations of professionals with the understanding and tools to address climate change. But we are also the last generation who can do something about it. So in Latin America, as you were mentioning, we have a lot of opportunities. We had, and you mentioned about the minerals, critical minerals. We have 2/3 of the critical minerals that are important for the energy transition. We also have the Amazon rainforest, which is the lung of the world. So we do have renewable resources, and it's really important. So if we're thinking about the energy transition, the green transition, and Latin America has all this to offer, what would be like the right way to do it? How do we increase the investments coming from abroad in the right way? What's your take about it?
Well, that's a great question. I just want to, as I answer that, I'm going to pick up on something that José Juan said as well, which is on the China question as well, right? And I think that we're not seeing, you go to Mexico and you don't see the growth, you don't see Chinese people as you're walking the streets of Mexico City. But you do also see, a 20-fold increase in Chinese investment across. It started from a very low level, but 20-fold increase across the region in the last 20 years. And I think that's a wake-up call. That's a wake-up call for, I think, for the United States. It's a wake-up call for Europe as well, insofar as how can we be even more competitive in the region, right? I just came back from Chile last week and talking again about ports, right? And it's only as we're looking at port investments, as we're looking at the Bogota Metro, it's only Chinese firms that are investing. And so how do we provide those opportunities? The U.S. has done some things through the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, but I think there's more to be done. Now, going to the Amazon, this is an important question, Marisela, because right now, many leaders are in Cali, Colombia for the COP16. Next year, folks will be in Brazil for COP30. And these are incredibly important, the biodiversity COP right now, and then the COP next year. These are absolutely fundamental. I was over at the World Bank last week, moderating a conversation with finance ministers from across the region, from the many countries. There's 8 countries in Latin America that are part of the Amazon. That's about 40% of South America that's part of the Amazon. And the Amazon is Amazon is the lungs of the world, right? And when we talk about Latin America, we talk about perceptions versus reality. Well, here's a reality versus a perception. A reality is the fact that Latin America is going to be absolutely essential for helping to solve some of the world's major challenges in the years that come. And biodiversity is one of those challenges. The region also, Brazil in particular, Argentina has an opportunity to really become a breadbasket for the world. As we're seeing increasing challenges with food security, there are those opportunities as well. We're also seeing some really innovative financing mechanisms coming out of the region, whether it's blue bonds, whether it's green bonds, whether it's biodiversity bonds. There's a lot of really interesting work being done to see how to capture financing in a way that also promotes biodiversity across the region, recognizing the fact that biodiversity is essential not just for the region, but we live in one world, right? And the more that we preserve that biodiversity in the Americas, the more that is helpful for the world writ large. And I think that's going to that needs to continue to be a focus moving forward. It is a very large priority for countries across the hemisphere. And also, not only does climate change or natural disasters has profound implications in the Caribbean. I do a lot of work in the Caribbean, and you have one horrible storm that comes through, one bad hurricane, it can wipe out an island for weeks, the power structure and whatnot. And unlike other places in the world, there's nowhere for the population to go except to leave the country, right? Excellent. And so natural disasters, climate change, incredible implications. One of the big challenges that we've continued to see is the number of migrants across the region. And as we look at climate change moving forward, those natural disasters will have profound implications on climate migrants that can be a great opportunity for countries, but also destabilizing if countries do not approach the integration of migrants in the correct way. So biodiversity, climate, incredibly important for the region and for the world writ large, and a real opportunity as well.
No, definitely. Well, actually, I'm coming back from COP16 in Cali, and one of the main topics was how do we co-create different innovative instruments to bring more investment into nature-based solutions, into biodiversity. We launched a biodiversity bond, and we expect to scale it. But obviously, there's also the need to better understand what does that mean, what does it take, and how to really understand that, and how you make the flows go to those type of topics.
Exactly, and I think also what's very optimistic is the fact that you're starting to see the multilateral institutions collaborate on this issue in particular, right? The Amazon in particular, right? The Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank Group, joining forces to looking at how to be even stronger partners, provide their technological know-how to the Amazon. And I think it's really important. We're looking at the Amazon. It's not just biodiversity, but also looking at the fact that there are 47 million people who live in the Amazon, right? And so thinking about solutions for the Amazon also means economic solutions, and it means providing jobs, sustainable jobs, so that there isn't the other alternative of having to cut down trees and other things that harm the environment writ large.
No, definitely. José Juan, your takes on climate change and Latin America?
I will put in this way. If you think about the global problems that we have, climate change, disruption of technology, migration, violence, instability. If you think twice on this, what you will conclude if you know Latin American history is that any of these questions can be answered globally without having Latin America around the table. Latin America has a large history of dealing with topics that suddenly has appeared on our agenda. Climate change, the Caribbean is a very big success, a landmark of what happened with hurricanes and how these affect the life, violence, inequality, exclusion. All these things has been the bread and butter of politics and economics in Latin America. In fact, in Latin America, you cannot explain what has happened in the last 50, 75 years without bringing to the first line of reasoning inequality, violence. And this is extremely important because what Latin American governments and societies have, it's an incredible experience of how you have to deal with these topics. Not because they have been successful in dealing with them, but because they can show us how you can going to fail if you follow the old ideas and you try to develop policies that are not socially based, historically based, and are acceptable for the people. That is a Themoglu story that has been mentioned today as a Nobel Prize, and Robertson. I think this is extremely important. And I think Latin America today has a very good opportunity to share this knowledge and to be around the table. It's not just because they can improve our politics. It's because we have to realize that Latin America is not anymore a problem for the global economy. It's not an economic problem that I have shown with my numbers on general crisis. It's part of the solution. Mm-hmm. And because they have the experience of what can work and what is not going to work. Look what happened with inequality and what has happened with inequality in the last 15 years, 20 years in Latin America. Of course, you have the big success of China, bringing people to the middle class through these very incredible rates of growth. But if you go to Latin America, you will see that 45 million people leave poverty in a very short period of time. That if you go and you try to measure where is Latin America today in terms of GDP per capita and distribution, you will see that Latin America is any longer a poor region. It's a middle-class region, and it explains politics, this explains a lot of things, innovation, entrepreneurship, fintechs, in the demand for inclusion. I think the things have changed profoundly. What has not changed? I think what has not changed, it's the very bad way in which academics and policymakers in Latin America approach their relation with the global conversation. They try to explain what's happening in Argentina, in Chile, or in Brazil. No longer, nobody is going to pay attention to this story. Are very complicated. You need a lot of investment, a lot of effort. The question is not try to explain Latin America. It's try to explain to the others what I have and what is my experience which can help you to solve the global problems, the public goods problems that we have in front of us and which has been the topic of this discussion this morning. I think there is a very big role, a big role to play by Latin Americans because we know what works and what is not going to work for sure. And this it's better to not to have all the recipes, but to know what is not going to work.
Yeah.
I think one key thing here is, and you're saying too, Jose Juan, is the region is an incredible opportunity, right? And I think with what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a rapidly changing global order, right? The world is changing, as we've talked about this throughout this conference today, the world is changing more quickly in the last few years than it's changed in decades, perhaps some of the greatest changes since World War II, right? Yeah. And so the importance of the Americas, the importance of Latin America for the United States will only continue to grow, and frankly, for Europe as well, will only continue to grow. Spain has long recognized this, and it is important for what the importance of the region as a trade partner, as a commercial partner, but we also saw that with votes at the UN around Russia's invasion of Ukraine and other critical votes. And so the region is increasingly an opportunity, but the region is also increasingly at the center of geostrategic competition on the global stage that's playing out. And from my perspective, what's most important is to have a pro-Europe, pro-US approach in the region rather than an anti-China approach. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily bode too well. And what's also fundamental, and we've talked about this, is in the absence of a lot of time, we've talked about the region as somewhat homogeneous as part of this conversation. But it's really important to drill down on specific countries, and not only specific countries, but specific regions within each country, right? And as we're looking at investment decisions, that is absolutely fundamental for making the right decisions and for knowing your local market.
Yes, no, definitely. Just because we have only a few seconds, but well, we talk about climate change and the opportunities that Latin America has to offer. All the critical minerals, the Amazon, it's really important for the world. It's a solution for the global challenges. Second, we talk about inclusion, social agenda, which is really important, how everything is moving so fast. But I would like to finish up with Jose Juan. I predict the future for Latin America as one word.
The geopolitical value of Latin America is increasing. And we have heard this morning
one word. One.
I heard a few words there, Jose Juan. Yeah.
Increase in geopolitical value.
Thank you. Jason.
Fundamental on the global stage. That's more than one word, but it's close. Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. So it was one word, but thank you so much, our panelists.